Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Venture Philanthropy Summit, to the panel. We had a summit a couple of years ago that's still stuck in my mind. So we've got a great panel of foundations, family offices, and so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and let everyone introduce themselves. This is your panel. As much as we're sitting over here talking, we'd love for the audience participation. So anytime you have a question, just put your hand up and we'll stop and we'll answer. Okay? So we're here to answer your questions and give you information, so feel free to interrupt at any given time. So my name is Christopher D'Souza. I am with a venture philanthropy or philanthropic venture firm. It seems like a little bit of a contradiction, venture and philanthropy. So the way we do it is we're venture, we make investments, we take an equity stake, just like a VC would. The difference being that we have a single LP, which is a family trust, that is deploying philanthropic dollars to help get companies started with the goal that eventually in 10, 15 years from now, whatever they're developing, as you know, our development cycles are very long, will get to the patient. And our investments are very mission-based. We typically invest about $1 million. We are very therapeutically focused. We only invest in cardiovascular, metabolic, and stroke. But we're relatively agnostic to technology, so we have devices, therapeutics, diagnostics, regenerative. And we tend to be the first investor. Generally in the company, we're the first investment dollars, not necessarily the first dollars, but the first investment dollars. And the goal is really to help companies get across this valley of death, right? Everyone, you go to raise money, well, we need data. Well, to get the data, you need money, and so on and so forth. So we help try and break that and catalyze the moving forward, the reaction moving forward. My background, PhD in metabolic diseases, worked in Novartis for many years in research and then business development, and then went to the sell side, and now at Broadview, one of 3 directors helping make decisions and sitting on boards. Jared?
Good morning, Gerard Honig, Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. Crohn's and Colitis Foundation was established in 1967. It's an integrated research and patient advocacy and education organization. The research budget is in recent years, about $30 million a year, each year going out in through a variety of mechanisms. The mission of the organization is to cure inflammatory bowel diseases, and in the meantime to support individuals that have those diseases in order to improve their quality of life. And pretty much all of our activities are oriented around that goal. As far as our approach to venture, traditionally the organization had been from a research perspective, a traditional grants-making organization. The leadership a number of years ago took a close look and decided that it was really unsatisfied with the level of, let's say, translational efficiency with which the really incredibly burgeoning research excitement in the inflammatory bowel diseases space was not necessarily being translated efficiently into meaningful clinical impact. And that's really prompted a significant reorganization of the funding priorities, of which the program that I manage, the entrepreneurial investing program, is part of that, but it's really an integrated part of the organization's activities, and we're looking to make targeted, asset-focused investments in specific product development opportunities with the potential to further our mission, either to cure Crohn's and colitis or to have positive impact on individuals with those diseases. We're agnostic with respect to technology. We're agnostic with respect to stage, with the caveat that we generally would not make any individual investment of more than $500,000 per program per year, so that might shift things more towards the early side. But in principle, we're agnostic. We're very new to this, and I was recruited specifically to develop this program, and generally we are very interested in engaging more meaningfully with the small company ecosystem that's responsible for so much of the innovation in the inflammatory bowel disease space. I'm a basic scientist by training, and for a number of years ran a drug delivery startup, which I founded in 2013, and really delighted to be here to speak with you.
Thanks, Joy. So hello everyone, my name is Maya Merrill. I am with the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, formerly with the MS Society. in a role where I was supporting discovery research and providing support for research fellowship and training programs. But I did transition over to the Fast Forward program in 2008 and was sort of pivotal in helping get that off the ground. Fast Forward is a spin out of the MS Society as a wholly owned and separate vehicle in order to sort of partner with early stage companies and fund early stage drug development with a focus on really kind of de-risking these programs and help move proof of concept studies into the clinic. And in doing so, we really do sort of build a typical process around sourcing and vetting projects, all of which sort of undergo the standard scientific and IP review that many companies are quite accustomed to. But I think where things kind of diverge a little bit from traditional grant funding, so to speak, is sort of the kind of rigor we build into our due diligence review and the transparency in the process. Because we do facilitate sort of engagement between companies and the advisors that we use to help vet programs. And so that's just one thing that kind of separates us from traditional grant funding. I think another difference is sort of that feedback, that constructive feedback, and that dialogue that we kind of facilitate. That certainly gives a company kind of a way forward, allows them to certainly make revisions and modifications to certain elements of their due diligence package when they do submit to funding for us. So that becomes sort of an iterative process, and of course our advisors that we do use are retained to really help bring those companies to a fundable level. So it's really not just a one-shot attempt at funding. If you don't make the cut, you don't have to wait a whole year to apply for funding. We really work to try and get companies ready for funding, and certainly those that are on the cusp. Or just need some sort of tweaking. So it's really a process that I think we're very proud of. And so once a funding recommendation is made, then that does go to a group of advisors, a volunteer advisory committee who works with us, and then subsequently to our board for a funding recommendation and approval. And then once a funding decision is made, parties then enter into what we call a sponsored research agreement. And that kind of just outlines the terms of the relationship and how funds are to be dispersed based on meeting certain milestones. We obviously put many tools in place for monitoring progress through routine meetings. So there's regular sort of oversight of programs. And this is kind of really important in ensuring that projects move forward and allows for course correction, so to speak, if things do go off the rails. And again, sometimes those advisors that we use are kind of retained to participate in ongoing oversight and to help kind of guide those projects forward. I think a typical investment for us is usually on the order of $500,000. But again, this kind of varies with each year depending on sort of the size and scope of a given call for proposals. So each round is kind of uniquely different.
So Maya, maybe we can hold off that because we'll get to that question.
We'll get to that
question.
Sure.
So we'll just do quick introductions.
Okay, sure. Sounds great. Thanks.
Javed?
Thank you. My name is Javed Furzan. I'm the VP of Business Development and Strategic Alliances for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. I'm not on your printed written agenda or poster board, but you'll find my bio online, and certainly welcome you to go to the LLS site, look at LLS research and all the great things that LLS is doing there for blood cancer and blood cancers. LLS has been in business, if you will, for over 60 years, mission focused on moving the needle in blood cancers to help to find cures. LLS is a not-for-profit, what I would characterize as a biopharma developer working through its partners to advance therapies to treat and hopefully cure blood cancers. Some recent successes that LLS helped to fund on the academic side was the CAR-T cell therapy work of Carl June, which has been licensed to Novartis by Penn and recently was approved, as most people may have seen. The Venclexta drug that AbbVie and Genentech are commercialized was funded by LLS and its partners in Australia. over 15 years worth of funding. So for anybody thinking that therapeutics is a quick ride, it's not the case. And then through the Therapy Acceleration Program, which I'll speak more about here, LLS funded Celator, which has a product called Vyxeos, and Celator was acquired by Jazz. That was approved this summer. And LLS funded Kite Pharma to help prioritize its recent CAR-T trial, which is in front of the FDA right now. So LLS is seeking to have impact and be an impact investor, which is a term I prefer over venture philanthropy. And the model LLS has is if you as an institution or you as a company monetize, LLS seeks some small share of that.
Hi, my name is John Parker. Today I'm going to talk about my role as a trustee of the Hood Foundation, and I manage our investment arm, CH Innovations. A little different than some of the others, we are not disease focused, we are pediatric or child health focused, fairly broadly across that category. We use a tool available to private foundations called program-related investments that allow us to make investments from our sort of charitable pool of capital. What's a little different about that compared to sort of most venture investors would be that these investments are primarily intended to further our mission. They're commercial, we can make money, but returns are a secondary consideration. We are really looking for situations where our capital can help move a company through those early, sort of critical early stages of commercialization. It's a relatively new program for the foundation. We are focused on the seed stage and just trying to find those places where our money can be instrumental in moving a company along to that next inflection point. So I'm going to leave it there.
Okay. So, foundations have typically been recognized or viewed as grant-giving agencies, right? And so this move into granting and getting a return, call it an investment or getting some return, is relatively new. How are you folks balancing that charitable grant-giving mission, which your donors are all giving money towards, versus going into this risky business of investing in companies? I mean, how do you balance, and at the end of the day, what are you looking for as a return? John, you want to start that end?
Sure. So we would like to make money, but we also are in a spot of we expect to take more risk on board than we would do if we were looking at this as strictly what I call fiduciary investment. We don't sit there and quantify it. We don't do valuations. We're looking at creating sustainable businesses with the view that if we can create a product to a patient, that there will be positive returns. Not always the case, but that is our basic view. If we can have a portfolio where our returns are positive at some level, that money recycles and can be used to help the next generation of patients, to fund the next generation of solutions. So we think about it from that sense. We are not trying to be a top quartile venture investor. We are not trying to lose money either. So we think about it from both perspectives.
And you probably don't have like the 10-year fund model. You have a longer.
We're perpetual in nature. It's an evergreen type situation. But everyone wants some wins. So if you get something that's an exit, it's a win. It shows proof of the program. But our metrics in terms of that it's not always going to be exited. Our immediate short-term goal is to help a company get to that next inflection point. That's critical, and that's our job. And then we pass it off to that next stage of investor. We're sort of like you guys. We're an unlikely follow-on investor. We have a very specific role that we're trying to fill in the development of a company.
And typically, what would you put into a company? What's your investment total?
it's relatively small. We're in the $200,000 to $300,000 range. We like to come into a company early in the first million, maybe two of their equity or convertible. We do convertibles mostly. So, but in their dilutive capital raise. So we want to be there early and be at a point where that money makes a difference.
Yeah. So. And that's the toughest money to get. Someone had a question in the back up there?
It's for the panel, Chris, but basically, I think a lot of the folks in the audience are companies that are looking for the right link to the right disease state philanthropic venture. And so maybe it would be helpful if you guys can give us an idea of how you go out and find companies. You know, obviously it's like trying to find the right connection to the right group that really makes the light go on. And so from both sides, you know, what's the best way to make that connection?
You want to carry on, John? And then we'll include it in our responses.
You're not disease focused, are you?
We're not. So it's ultimately, I think everyone else in the panel is going to be able to tell you a little bit more specifically how they are targeting very specific things that's tied to their research. For us, it's a little bit more holistic, I guess is the word I've used. We are trying to find those things where we can have the most impact with our dollars, and that the companies that we're investing in is making a significant impact that we can change. If we can bring in other things, including we have a big grant side. If we can bring in a lot of our grantees, connect companies with our grantees, get them expertise. It's just finding the match. These guys are going to probably be able to zero in on some very specific things that I can't.
Yeah, thank you. So LLS raises steady state $250 million a year, mostly from mom and pop donors, $75 a pop, order of magnitude. So they have a lot of different ways of raising money, campaigns and events. There is some corporate money that comes on top of that, typically with respect to copay assistance and other ways to keep drugs affordable for blood cancer patients. The order of magnitude dollars of that go $250 million that goes into research every year is 60 to 80 million order of magnitude. That's divided into the grants, academic focus grants with collaborators at key institutions in a competitive peer review process where LLS is putting out about 40 million a year, roughly 15 million a year in new grants because they roll every 3 years typically. And some of these are $600,000 grants, that's the bread and butter translational research program. Then you've got the 5-year, $5 million plus specialized centers of research like they did at Penn or in Australia and those types of places. And then some smaller grants as well. So that's a very traditional grant model where if the academic institution monetizes, LLS gets a defined small percentage of that after expenses. The therapy acceleration program is order of magnitude 10 million a year. LLS has been doing it for 10 years as of this year, so 100 million in. This is to move the needle more so on clinical stage opportunities. Early on, there were a fair number of academic projects that shifted over time. So of that 100 million, roughly 60 million plus has gone into companies. The balance into academic stage projects that were either out-licensed after the fact or hopefully will get out-licensed if there's any traction there. And for that program, LLS is funding first in class, not best in class, not a me too, first in class, looking for innovative technological approaches. The cost of capital is roughly 15 to 25% if you were to put a number on it. That's if LLS gets paid, because most of these deals are product collaboration deals that look a lot like a license, that back-end is loaded with late-stage clinical development and regulatory milestones. And there's some partial acceleration in the event that the program is partnered or if the company is acquired. And the order of magnitude is 3 to 6 million per project or company over a 2 to 3 year period. So it's a tranche type of structure. Some have been as high as 9 million, such as the Stellator Vixius project. And as far as sourcing, we source from all avenues basically. So we are attempting to increase the proactive outbound outreach in terms of sourcing by going to these types of conferences and actively focusing on a portfolio approach to identify using Cortellis database and others, companies that might be in the therapeutic area or niche indications. And then we get a lot of inbound because LLS is so large and has a reputation through its research network that we do get a lot of inbound.
So when you invest in, out of this 100 million, some of it has gone to progressing collaborations, academic research grants that went into translation. But when you give or you deploy some of that capital into companies, do you take an equity stake?
So there have been some equity stakes, only a handful. That's traditionally been, excuse me a second, companies where the asset and the company is basically one and the same. Maybe low liquidity situation, reaching an inflection point. So there's as an example, a publicly traded company over in Northern Europe, phase 3, graft versus host disease, mitigating that as a post-transplant type of side effect that they're trying to mitigate. Phase 3 trial, the company and the asset are one and the same, illiquid stock for the most part, so it made more sense to take equity in that particular instance on that end of the curve as opposed to a collaboration type of deal where we would get paid milestones and royalties on the back end. And in the earlier stage area where we might only put in, let's say, $500,000 in any one particular company, there's equity, convertible notes or equity, depending on what makes the most sense. So we'll negotiate that like you would expect any other investor. So it's smart money in that we're not looking to be greedy, but if it's at the stage of the investment where the life cycle where the company is negotiating preferred stock at a discount, we want those same rights.
Okay. Good. Mike?
Yeah. So I think for us, I think it's sort of understanding the therapy landscape and what are sort of the unmet medical needs for patients living with multiple sclerosis. But a lot of it does sort of have to do with the overarching organization, the parent organization, the MS Society, and sort of the broader research agenda of the organization. And where can we sort of not only just make the most impact, but where can we kind of be complementary or even additive to some of the traditional research programs funded through the parent organization. And so that's all kind of very important for us. Again, we play in a certain space because that is sort of our capacity at the moment. We really were meant to be sort of a bridge or an enabler for companies to kind of engage in further development activities down the road. We were never intended to sort of be the source of funding to fully fund full-on clinical trials. So it's sort of important to know what can the venture philanthropy group fund and what will they be willing to fund. And so that's just a little bit about us.
And then do you take some sort of a back end or return on that funding? Because then typically if you say a fund, it's an academic grant,
Right.
Go do your research, publish, and there's no back end requirements. But
Right.
when you fund, there is obviously some back end requirements.
There are. I mean, I think in connection with our supportive programs, we do take a return in exchange for our funding. But, it is really simply to keep us going. It is not in any way meant to encumber a company in any way. And we actually work really hard with companies at finding, at least attempting to find that favorable middle ground when it comes to sort of negotiating this can somewhat be nebulous return on investment.
Okay, so you don't have one set of metrics for everyone. It's just all negotiated on.
It's all negotiated, and it all depends. I mean, it just depends on the company, the size of the investment, the stage in which the company is at, whether the company's fundraising or not. It really depends.
So, return for our organization is essentially threefold. So, the first and most important is addressing gap areas in progress in inflammatory bowel disease. So, like I think probably most disease foundations, we're a consensus-driven organization. That consensus with respect to what are the key gaps that need to be addressed in order to improve the outlook for patients with IBD is generally driven by scientific advisors working in various work groups. There's a periodic process which typically results in a publication that is intended to be a consensus recommendation as far as what is really missing in the IBD field. And I think most organizations like ours will publish those periodically. So return for us is progress towards any one of those. That's true for all of our programs, and particularly with respect to funding startup companies or entrepreneurially oriented academic groups, and any tangible progress towards product development that could credibly de-risk a program eventually reaching the market would be the primary form of return. Financial return is secondary as far as sizes. So we have actually not invested in for-profits before. I was essentially recruited in order to operationalize that program. We anticipate that the sizes of those investments will be between $100,000 and $500,000 per year, with the possibility of continuation on a milestone-dependent basis, and potentially longer time frames depending on the program. The structures, financial structures, so we do have a template, which we're certainly happy to start from. As was mentioned, everything is negotiable, as is usually the case with financing. I should say, most things are negotiable. Well, one thing you should consider when working with organizations like this is that they're typically a little bit restricted with respect to bandwidth. So simplicity is a positive thing. Your best argument for favorable financial terms will be around what is in the best interest of the asset and the asset's eventual development. So if you can credibly, and back up these arguments saying that a certain milestone payment structure is going to disincentivize the follow-on investment that you would actually need in order to develop the program, that will be a compelling argument, especially if it's backed up and validated by external opinion. So that's, we will consider taking an equity stake, but again, it's all about, it's very much focused on the asset, right? So we would love to support small companies that are focused on IBD to the extent that they are focused on IBD, and that's our interest, that's our exclusive interest, right? So we would probably not be that interested in taking equity in a company that is primarily not focused on IBD, but has a particular avenue that they would like to develop. We're very interested in bringing new technologies that have not historically been applied to IBD to the field. That certainly is a win for us as well. And then obviously, like most organizations, to the extent that progress is made, we're interested in being at the center of that, right? And being a catalyst and a convener and being recognized as such. And so there's a certain kind of level of public relations benefit that foundations may get from working with dynamic startups. So that's certainly something to consider, and that comes with conference programming, activities that generally reflect positively on both the fundee and the funder as well. And then the last question, how to get in touch. So typically disease foundations, because of their mission, should be outward-facing organizations. They should be relatively accessible. It should be pretty straightforward to find out the right contact person. Certainly introduction's never hurt, obviously, like in any other field. In this case, introduction might be with a individual who has served as a scientific advisor or has been funded by a grant mechanism, for example. Those are always, that's a common way for us to connect with small companies where SAB members have advised us in other capacities. We come to conferences like this, we get a steady stream of inquiries, we watch the news, we have limited access to some of the competitive intelligence resources that some organizations have. But again, consider the bandwidth in your communications, identify the right person, understand the strategic priorities of the organization and the gaps that they're trying to address, and think, it doesn't need to be, you don't need to make a 20-point PowerPoint. It doesn't necessarily need to be formal, but you have to consider really what that organization is about and what their constraints are and what their interests are. And take feedback. When feedback is offered, the next time you have the call, have thought about it and have addressed it in a thoughtful way. That's always a great way to move the conversation forward.
So to answer your question, I think any and every entrepreneur who is raising money should leave no stone unturned, right? Now, with these three organizations, MS, leukemia, Crohn's, obviously if you're developing something in that space, to go to those foundations. It's a little bit less clear with John and myself here, which is why we're also out of there pitching and letting people know, hey, we've actually got money, contrary to the public opinion that there's no money to investment dollars available. We're making investments, and here's what we invest in. But I think, Google it, right? I mean, if you put the word cardiovascular investors into Google, you're going to come up with Broadview Ventures at the very top. So to that extent, the answer to your question is it's incumbent on every entrepreneur to be out of there looking for money, whether it's SBR grants, whether it's the foundations, which is a little bit less restrictive and the paybacks are lower, versus also the venture capital organizations and angels and high net worth individuals. Just to make a point, a lot of people say, well, SBR grants take too long. Well, according to PitchBook, it takes 12 months on an average to raise a Series A. Okay, so if you do both of them in parallel, you're going to get something at the end of it. At Broadview, we're over here, several of my colleagues out of here getting the word around. But I think the word is around now, and I think we're seeing 95% of everything that there is out in cardiovascular, metabolic, and stroke. Our investment structure is slightly different. We do make an investment. We do take an equity stake. We do take ownership in the company. But our return is more return on mission and less so return on investment. For us, it's the opportunity to be able to say 10 years down the road, here are the multitudes of people who have been positively impacted by the therapies and the devices and the treatments that the companies we help get started have developed. But it's a long road. And we're typically investing $1 million. We're coming in at the very beginning. We typically also don't follow on. We'd rather take that capital and put it in the next set of companies. We're doing an average of 4 companies a year, 35 investments to date. And, we've had some good exits. We're not going to complain and turn money down if it comes to us. We are a team of 6 people, so you can imagine 4 investments a year, which is $4 million. The traditional 2% of that is not going to cover very much in terms of operational costs. So the family does cover the entire operational costs of Broadview Ventures and allows us to make those investments. But that said, because we're funding innovation and because we're funding revolutionary approaches to treating patients, it's very innovative, which means it's very high risk. But if it succeeds, you're going to have patients' lives that are going to be positively impacted, and there'll be money coming in over there, and so the returns will be positive. And to that extent, we're very patient. We don't have a 10-year cycle. We're going to do this forever and ever, and so we can afford to wait 10, 15 years for a return. So that's one of the benefits in working with organizations across this table, is that we're very patient capital. But more importantly than that, or as important, is we're bringing the disease knowledge to the table. So as you are developing a product in that specific area, we understand and we know where the gaps are, and we can help direct it, right? You don't want to go into that area. It's a great technology, you want to go in over here. I think we're also, what I've heard from everyone, is we're investing in innovation. So it's more revolutionary and less evolutionary, not so much in Me Too's, etc. But capital is difficult to get. We see over 350 proposals a year. We probably triage about 70% of them out, but the 30% that we look at, we land up with about four proposals, so 4 investments a year. Our investments are done on a triennial basis when our advisory board meets. And as I said, typically we're in somewhere in the $1 million range. Now, $1 million doesn't get you very far, so now we're happy to lead rounds and help the company raise 2-3 million. We're not going to get into a 10 million syndicate, because if you're raising 10, if you can raise 9, you can raise 10. You don't need the Broadview million. The impact of our money is significantly lower over there than it would be for a startup company that needs that first $1 million or 2 million. Or you've got an SBR grant that you need matching investment dollars for, right? So we have a company that is funded all the way through phase 1 on the back of $7.5 million from NIH in the form of SBR grants and VTA grants. The phase 2B required $1 million match, which is what we put in, and so they're moving forward. So these are ways in which we will leverage our dollars or work with small investors or family offices or the foundations. Unfortunately, we don't have too many foundations in the cardiovascular metabolic space other than American Heart Association, British Heart Foundation, which we are very closely aligned with and work very closely with. So, we do less now of outreach to companies, because I think we're seeing, as I said, 95% of what's out of there. And now our focus in terms of outreach is more towards the investment side, because we've got this huge portfolio. Many of these companies are raising money, and being on the board, our goal is to try and help them. So actually at this Resi, our team has more meetings with investors than we have with companies. So that's what we're going forward. Any questions, please?
I have a question for the panel, is to kind of understand, so MS spun out your fast forward. Crohn's and colitis, you have kept it in the foundation, LLS as well. So what is kind of the decision here to say we rather spin it out or we rather keep it in the foundation? And the second question that I have is, how are your academic traditional researchers that have received these grants for the last 150 years from your organization and suddenly don't anymore, how do they respond? So those we think might be thoughts.
Yeah, so fast forward, we did spin that out as a wholly owned subsidiary, an LLC. It is an LLC. And I think, at least at the time, maybe not so important now, but 8 years ago, at the time it was important for us to sort of keep those walls up, to keep sort of our fundraising and our sort of marketing efforts separate from that of the parent organization. It was important for us to keep it separate so that we could actively partner with and fund those companies. We at the time we weren't able to do it any other way. We are governed by our own board, so that's a different board. Yep, different board from the national board. And so we do sort of tend to keep activities and operations very separate. But by the same token, it is like a vertical and extension of the MS Society's traditional research and fellowship training programs. I mean, it's very...
Does the money flow between the two organizations or neither?
They do now, but at the time, again, when we were started, they didn't. So we are looking more to become more integrated with the parent.
Yeah, thank you. So LLS, the last 10 years has been running its therapy acceleration program, has not had any separate legal entity. We are in the process of setting up a wholly owned LLC, primarily for risk management and asset segregation related matters and liability containment. LLS, particularly with the academic stage TAP project, has taken a very active role. So, concerns about liability with respect to candidates that are moving into the clinic or actions with CROs, direct contracting with CROs and CMOs. So that's an area that I flagged immediately once I joined the organization last November. Transparency, fund return, flow of returns back to LLS. So the ability to have cleaner accounting is going to be enabled by this. The LLS board had set up a subcommittee of the board, a committee called the TAP committee. So that's the oversight group that LLS has in place that will continue to have oversight over the LLC. Management and employees will act on behalf of the LLC, but will remain employees of LLS with some of their time contracted out to the LLC to try to preserve as much liability containment as we can there. So LLS is moving in the direction of formalizing what it's been doing for a number of the reasons as I've outlined. With returns coming in over the course of the last year of $30 to $35 million on $100 million put out there, of which about 60 of it had been to companies over a 10-year period. So, 50% of your money back rolling out, order of magnitude, maybe slightly more. You have donors, big donors, and others saying, oh, should we start a venture fund? And at this point in time, my recommendation has been, number one, don't let others rely on your due diligence because you have a whole set of liability-related matters there. Number two, organizationally, from a reporting and compliance perspective, if you think about fiduciary responsibilities, broker-dealer regulations, other types of compliance matters, totally not set up to deal with that. And manage other people's money. So my advice in the near term to LLS has been hold off. Let's get your ducks in a row first on a very simple, wholly owned LLC. That structure will enable LLS to basically help fund new codes, whether acting alone or in conjunction with other investors. So drop down LLCs or drop down C Corps, whatever makes the most sense, that are very asset single purpose entity focused. And take that stepwise before you decide you want to compete with organized venture capitalists who are in it to win it in terms of a return. And just one final comment, we have had some venture funds approach LLS saying, invest in our fund and we'll carve out a portion of it for blood cancer. But, again, I don't think the organization is there yet.
It's interesting. We at Broadview had a symposium or a conference in 2013, and Lou DeGennaro was over there. It was called the Venture Philanthropy Summit, and what we were hearing from the foundations was that there is a tremendous pushback from the donors as to you're not for profit, you can't be making a profit, or you're taking our money and putting into risky business, but these things change over time, and I think the cystic fibrosis success has been a huge push in allowing the organ foundations to change their structure. And so, how about?
Well, I'll just address the last question. I don't have too much to add. I think whether the funding organism is an LLC or not, I mean, it's not really does not affect the company that much if things are properly managed. And then we have a wide range of different perspectives from our donors. In terms of our academic funded investigators, their perspective is also diverse. But what we're trying to do is frame the program as something that is adding value to what they are doing by providing an outlet for innovations that may be coming out of their lab. And the truth is, our funded investigators, especially ones that perhaps are earlier in their careers, are very receptive to the fact that there is a funding gap with respect to the early steps towards commercially tractable programs, and that they do not, despite the kind of best efforts and or representations there too of academic institutions, there is a lack of resources for that kind of work. And that kind of product development oriented work is something which everybody is supposed to be doing, but is not particularly incentivized by academic structures or within academic institutions. So what we are attempting to do is maintain all of our traditional, what we call flagship programs, and present this as an additional resource for our funded investigators, and really try to engage them meaningfully in the process. And so far, so good, but there is certainly a tension intrinsic to the organization. And being sensitive to that and managing that is not necessarily a bad thing for a small company.
Last couple of minutes. Any other questions? So if we can just take 1 minute each and just give the audience a sense of do's and don'ts when they approach each of our foundations and entities. John?
Know what I'm investing in. It's children's health on seed stage. I get people pop in with something that, well, they touch on children's health, but it's really just, well, they're included in our population. I'm very specific. I want to see things that are highly targeted. It's not, the company can do other things, but what I fund is children's health. And I'm not going to look at a public company. Don't approach me about a public company. It's seed stage, so just note, come to me with the right reasons.
I would say for LLS that any organization approaching LLS should come in a professional way, have a professional package, expect that there's going to be professional diligence that's done. Now the IP diligence and some of the other diligence that you would find in a biopharma, private, publicly traded company deal, you're not going to see, but there's going to be a fairly high standard of technical diligence performed. And expect professional documents. I brought in outside counsel from brand name firms at various price points for various types of transactions, ranging from Wilson Sonsini and Covington and Cooley down to more regional firms like Saul Ewing and other local firms for various types of transactions to find, what's the right tool to get the deal done. Because we want to set the transaction up for success. We want the companies to be set up for success, and we will even have research advisory committee roles where we're trying to train these companies up so that they can successfully partner or successfully be acquired, because that's the type of success we're looking for, which is for something to get to the marketplace.
Yeah, I think with us just kind of knowing and understanding what our priorities are, realizing that, things change, priorities change, and then just sort of being responsive to the current funding opportunity. Also, I think if you feel you're not a fit or you feel you're too early, because again, we do work sort of beyond basic biology and into that sort of translational realm, ask about other funding mechanisms. I mean, we fund 380 projects a year through the parent organization. So ask about some of those other sort of traditional grant or pilot funding mechanisms. And then lastly, think of creative ways to partner with other foundations. I mean, we're always looking to sort of share risk and co-invest in other research programs that maybe impact other disease areas. So, if you have another organization that's willing to sort of form a syndicate with us, we're always open to this type of ideas.
Do exceed expectations always, even for an informal conversation. Nothing wrong with an informal conversation, but if you use the time efficiently that you have, the face time, you can have the opportunity to advance your program. Do read the instructions. A lot of disease foundations are transparent by relatively high degrees of transparency, and they will be very explicit about, and don't make assumptions. And don't overstate your research. There's a certain kind of style of presentation which can work well in some cases in pitching to, for example, investors that don't invest in the disease space. But if you make very a style of claim about your research when you're speaking to a disease foundation that probably has, the top 20 key opinion leaders on its advisory council, who have been working on a problem for 20 years, if you come in and say you have the one solution that they haven't thought of, you're going to, even if it's true, you're going to be met with skepticism. So you want to find a nice balance between the kind of venture style of presentation and the academic style, and find kind of a middle ground there for this kind of conversation.
No, that's absolutely correct, because all of us have significant depth in our respective areas, and while you may have a good understanding of your technology, we have a much bigger view of the competitive landscape, for example. We know where the gaps are because we are constantly looking at where the gaps are from analysis and from talking to KOLs. We're open. If in doubt, come talk to us, right? If you don't know whether it's going to fit into our mission, come talk to us. If it's oncology, no. If it's infectious diseases, no. But cardiovascular is very broad. We have preeclampsia, we have gestational diabetes, because metabolic is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. We have ischemic stroke. So it's very broad, and all are welcome. Talk to us. You don't need an introduction to come talk to us. But when you do come to present, spend less time on the market size and all that sort of stuff, because we do know it. But focus on your technology, how it's different, why it's different, and what gap is it filling, right, from a patient impact perspective. If you're coming to us with a better stent, that's more for us. I mean, it may be, material science, etc., for you, very, very interesting, but for us it's incremental, because there are a lot of stents on the market, and just another stent might move the needle just a little bit. We're looking for really, really innovative, revolutionary sort of things, which are risky, and that's our goal, to help you de-risk your program with enough of data where you can convince the next investor to come in and give you some money. So in the interest of time, we'll close. We're around if you want to ask any more specific questions, but thanks to the organizer, and thanks to all of you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.